The astronomers have long been the leading theorists on the possibility of life in outer space. Astronomer Carl Sagan is consultant to a current Air Force scientific panel. Astronomer Thornton Page was on a CIA committee that investigated UFO reports in 1952. Its conclusion? No evidence of UFOs.
CBS News anchor Walter Cronkite is talking in 1966 about astronomer Thornton Page's role on the CIA-backed Robertson panel, which only analyzed select UFO reports up to 1952. The report's self-documented bias and plans to shape public opinion away from UFO interest kept it classified for well over a decade or two.
Our panel was expected to be, and I think was, objective in its approach, and tried to evaluate all the reports without saying they're ridiculous in advance. That has been repeated quite recently, and that is a good reason for talking with Carl Sagan here, because he's in the same position that I was, being the only astronomer in a similar panel.
Page's slight of Dr. Hynek and Ohio State is gently corrected with this graphic.
There's not a single verified or checked out report which is at all connectable with the possibility of extraterrestrial life.
This statement is provably not true, by design and leading you to make the connections to refute it. Start with the cases in the early to mid-1960s that the Air Force labeled as unidentified. As for the 1950s, Sagan also fails to spot the coal pollution connection between Shell Alpert's 16 July 1952 photo at Salem Harbor, with Dr. Paul R. Hill's sighting over Hampton Roads later that same evening. The report from the established NACA scientists supported the younger man's physical evidence. Sagan's omission of this fact, and others, is as glaring as the lights of that day.
It doesn't say that I think extraterrestrial life is impossible. Quite the contrary. I think that many of the stars in the sky have planetary systems. We know enough now about the origin of life to make it appear likely that life arises naturally on the vast bulk of these planets. It's possible, but by no means certain, that life on many of these planets evolves into beings which are as advanced as we, or more advanced. And I don't see any reason why we can't imagine that there are civilizations thousands or millions of years in advance of ourselves capable of technical feats that we can hardly imagine. If you would believe, as the flying saucer cultists would have us believe, that the majority of the saucer reports are due to their visitations, then you have a very strange situation.
Punching low with disparaging language, Sagan has erected a doozy of a weak, loaded straw man. Air Force Project Blue Book Special Report 14 had been public for over a decade, since October 1955. Instead of addressing the stunning details therein, Sagan has chosen to beat on fabricated cultist clowns from the 60s, man, who supposedly believe that the majority of UFO sighting reports are visitations.
That means several spaceships are coming to the Earth over interstellar distances every day, as if all the anthropologists in the world were to converge on one of the Andaman Islands in the Indian Ocean because they just invented the fishnet there or something.
In 1966, Sagan is mocking the idea of multiple visitations in one day, despite NASA's 1963 conclusion that the Apollo Command Service Module would serve as a human mothership to deploy and retrieve lunar excursion modules in orbit. Was the avowed advocate for robotic exploration of the cosmos really so dull at this time? Or was the ridicule disingenuous and designed to slip ideas past Harvard University's critical old guard?
I think it's much more reasonable if you want to speculate on the possibility of extraterrestrial intelligence, that there are very rare visits from extraterrestrials to the Earth. There's no evidence for this. I just say that's not implausible. But to have several visits a day, I think, is straining credulity.
Why do you waste your time reading this junk?
It's not junk, Fred. Scientists are working on these things right now. What is science fiction today may be science fact tomorrow.
You mean we're gonna jump into our space saucers and take off for a weekend?
Flintstone, when you laugh, you show not only your tonsils, but your ignorance. Everything Barney said is true. In fact, that book doesn't begin to describe the wonders of the future. There's no use talking to you, Flintstone. You're a man completely devoid of imagination.
Gosh, Gazoo, that's really not fair. Carl Sagan demonstrated his Harvard-throttled imagination for National Geographic in December 1967, the year before he was denied tenure at the Ivy League University. Perhaps you are offended by his portrayal of an alien from the Jell-O fruit salad species, one who finds his way in the daytime by his little red tendrils and who at night digs a hole? Well, you may have a point, Gazoo. Harvard's error was to Cornell's benefit, as well as Johnny Mack and Avi Loeb.
I think a key to what's behind the real belief in flying saucers is most easily obtained if you look at the contact myths. There are several hundred people in the United States who claim to have had personal contact with the inhabitants of flying saucers who have landed. And if you examine these myths, you find that there are some peculiar regularities. The inhabitants of saucers are benevolent. I mean, they're really concerned for our well-being. They're omnipotent, extremely powerful, omniscient, extremely knowledgeable, and they often wear long white robes. Now, this combination is something I've heard in another context. This isn't science, this is religion. And what I suspect is happening is this. We live in very unsettled times. It used to be possible to believe in a personal, benevolent, powerful, all-knowing God who cared about individuals who you could pray to. But now, there's very few people who really believe that, I think. Science, for good or for ill, has destroyed a lot of the traditional theologies. And yet people have the same needs to believe that they always did, perhaps more so because of the times we live in. Well, the flying saucer myths are a really clever compromise. It's a way of having beings that come from the sky, that are worried about us, that are powerful, that are going to step in and prevent us from destroying ourselves, as we very well might.
And as I watched, and suddenly, in the same direction this stuff was flying at about 8,000 miles an hour, an object came into the frame, shot a beam of light at the warhead, flew up to the top, shot another beam of light at the warhead, flew around the direction it was flying, shot another beam of light at the warhead, flew down, shot another beam of light at the warhead, and flew out the same way it came in. And the warhead tumbles out of space.
And yet have it in the cloak of science, so that no one can say nonsense that doesn't match science. It's all very pseudo-scientific. I would think that at least for the contact myths and probably for a lot of the events of people who just see things they don't understand flying overhead, that what's involved psychology and theology and not so much the physical sciences.